Okay, people, it is 2 o'clock, and I suggest that we will be starting with our webinar. So, first of all, I want to welcome you to our webinar on the CERIS webinar on community policing. And as we all know, communities evolve and security challenges become more complex, and strengthening trust, collaboration, and innovation in policing, well, is becoming more critical than ever. So therefore, I'm very pleased that we can take a closer look at community policing, both take a quick look into the past to two projects, but also to take a look at present projects. So we have 3 interesting initiatives that we can highlight, and we also will take a glimpse into the future of community policing. Well, as said, we have a very tight program, so please leave your questions for the Q&A slot that we have further on in the program. Already put your questions in the chat. But now, without any further ado, I will happily give the floor to Nada or Felix from the CERIS community from DG Home. Take a quick look into the past on 2 projects that have been conducted a few years ago, but are still very relevant for us. First of all, it's the Unity project, presented by Saskia Bayer from Centric, and next the Inspect project, presented by Ivan Martinez from the local Valencia police. But first, Saskia, please, the floor is yours.
So can you hear me now? Yep.
You're good to go, Saskia. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks, Nada, for laying out the landscape of the projects very beautifully, I think very concisely. So I'm going to take us back for about 10 years into the Unity project, which was really looking at community policing on a European level, and comparing also, looking into how does community policing look like and how should it look like in Europe, and what can we learn from comparing different perspectives within Europe. So the overall objective and ambition was to strengthen the effective engagement between police forces and the communities, and to create an overall safer society for all. And this we broke down into 3 strategic objectives, looking first of all in understanding what are best practices, current practices in community policing in various communities in various countries. How are they perceived? How do they work? What are the challenges that we encounter? What are the strengths that we can learn from the various countries and various communities? And then the question, how can we transfer this into technologies, approaches to make community policing and online community policing, to connect with communities also online, next to efforts on the street, physical. And then also considering what type of training do police forces need, what kind of awareness raising is necessary also within police forces about engagement and increasing engagement between policing and communities. So these were the 3 overall objectives that we had. And how did we go about it? It was a 15-partner consortium across 10 different countries. The consortium was led by a UK police force, so an end user in West Yorkshire. And we had countries included from Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Estonia, Germany. So quite a large range across European context, which I think was a very, very useful exercise in really understanding the variations and differences across areas in Europe. And as I said, it's a look into the further past. We started in 2015 and finished in 2018. So what I want to focus on today is looking at the foundations of community policing and to see what work did we actually do in creating an understanding of community policing and best practices. So the way we went about it is to first look into what actually do we know about community policing. And it will not be a surprise, because it's still the case today that there are very, very different approaches to it, very different understandings, very different definitions. And so looking into the various literatures and approaches, you can see very different approaches, from socially defined one, community policing, to what is the purpose, it's about reassurance, for instance, to community policing that is focused on local definition, neighborhoods, local communities. So a large range of different ways of approaching it, talking about it, thinking about it. And you will also find, again, that has probably not changed, that police forces also are positioned in different ways towards the communities. So in our project, we had national police forces with a kind of national policing model like the Netherlands and Belgium, Finland. We had decentralized policing model, for instance, in Germany, with a kind of federal setup. We had centralized so-called Napoleonic models, we called them, but also Anglo-American P-Light models in the UK. So from the start, very different types of approaches to policing in itself. So the question that we had is, what does this mean now for an overarching idea of community policing, and what can we learn from each other? So what we then did is to do a lot of foundational work with police forces in our consortium, but also with the communities, to understand current practices and what works and what doesn't work well, what is our current needs. So we did about 323 interviews with community members, as well as police officers in the community policing environment. And community members will try to do collect quite a diverse sample, in the sense of looking at political actors like mayors, NGOs, charities, talking to local businesses to understand what are their experiences of community policing and their requirements, looking at citizens across different age groups, young people, older people, looking at social services, healthcare providers, schools, but also IT providers, and people in the legal sphere, like lawyers and judges, legal support, etc. So quite a variety of different voices and different perspectives that we try to collect. And from there, what we try to understand is, what is it actually that community policing is about in its core. So to give you a little bit of an overview of what we had in terms of conversations. So in the white boxes, I put some of the quotes we got from our interviewees, where, for instance, German police said, well, it's about the restoration of subjective sense of security. So feeling safe in a community is very important. It's one of the core elements of community policing. Or it is rather by the protection of life and the provision of security of the citizens in their everyday lives. So this is from Croatia, from a community member from technology company. So quite similar, slightly different flavor, but quite similar. Or if you look at a Scotland community political member said, well, the local CP officer is able to calm the situation down because the public knows him and trusts him. So there's a lot of things about local connection and trust. So these are some of the voices that we found. And if we then went through our 323 interviews overall, what we see are certain elements emerging and certain aspects emerging and coming back. And that is very often around the building of trust. And that can be at different stages. Either they can say, well, we have it as a police force, or we're currently building it or improving on it. It is built around individuals that are known and trusted. It is about enhancing social efficiency and cohesion, where the police role is very often about educating citizens about their security, being a mediator if there are conflicts, or if there is a need for intervention, handling problems. So it doesn't even go to the justice system. So prevention of issues emerging and becoming ingrained in communities longer term. And this is also where, for instance, preventing disorder, improving safety is one of the very, very strong focus, but in the sense of preventing disorders, preventing issues arising and ingraining themselves into communities. So these are some of the examples that we found. What we then did is to try to compare this across communities and across countries. And what you can see here on the left side is the answers from police members. They said, well, if we look at the different aspects of community policing, for instance, what is the goal of community policing? Which might be to gather information, share information with the community, or to get good communication dialogue going, or to be available, accessible, approachable for communities, or also to access fringe groups that are hard to reach in normal cases. So the left side, this is police members, on the right side, community members. And you see there are differences in what is seen as important goals or the main goals of community policing. But in the same regard, we see that all of them are there. So we have different flavors, we have different foci, but in the same regard, there is some overlaps, there are some consistencies and some agreements, at least, on what are the core elements of community policing. So taking this, I mean, we had many more of those figures in this comparison, obviously, but just if we take all of this together, what we then do is try to come up with an overall overarching frame or picture of community policing across our various countries and our various communities. And so what we then created is what we call the purpose, conditions, and actions model of community policing, and the CAP model. So the ambition there is to create a foundation for further research and further working, and also further projects like we have now within KOBAN, for instance, to see how can we actually, what is community policing like, and where do we need to focus on if we want to improve community policing, if you want to create new models or new technologies, or talk about what is good community policing. So you can use this as a foundation for discussion, as well as development of practices and approaches. So the purpose is what needs to be achieved. What is the purpose and the overactive goal-based overarching goal of community policing? Conditions refer to the success criteria. So what police organizations need to be in the eyes of the public. And then we talk about the actions as well, what organizations need to do, for instance, good communication, addressing the local needs, collaborating, etc. So in the one sense, the CAP model is quite conceptual, if you like. So it gives us a framework to think about community policing. How should it be done? What should be in place? What should it aim for in the end? But again, it's also a methodology to kind of test what things are in place. So if you have a certain initiative, you can also look and say, well, actually, is it addressing all of the different purposes of community policing, like prevention and safety? Does it work in the sense of creating trust and social efficiency, or do we have enough collaboration with local communities that we need to address? In the same regard, I think the disclaimer is it's not a shopping list in the sense of it's a tick list. But looking at this, it's really thinking about community policing in a comprehensive framework. So just saying, yes, we do all of this purposes, conditions, actions not sufficient, but really looking into how can we accomplish these elements is important. We also use this model to look into the practice of community policing, and specifically around technologies. So what you can also do is to think around, if we want to develop technologies, support technologies, online communities, for instance, for community policing, how would they need to look like? And this is just one example where we did this for 4 different countries within our setting, where we said, so what actually are those different goals for ICTs in the context of community policing? So what is needed, like bidirectional communication between police authorities and multiple communities? It needs to improve the cooperation and collaboration. But it can also look into the different conditions of acceptance. So what does it need? What does a tool need to be and to do for it to be accepted? And we can then look for the policing side of acceptance as well as community side of acceptance, and see there are similarities, but of course there are also differences in the sense of mutual trust, of course, needs to exist, because otherwise people will not work online, will not go online and use and, for instance, install applications. there needs to be a clear terminology of how you use it, what data is provided, how is privacy enforced, etc. And then you can also look at different requirements for the tool itself. What does it need to do to achieve those different purposes within community policing? How can it then do good collaboration and communication? So you can use the CAP model actually to look into the specific requirements of practices, of technologies, etc. So this is a very quick overview of the kind of the foundation that Unity laid back then, and we worked really on trying to get a comprehensive understanding of community policing in a European context. And we did that very specifically. Also, as Nada pointed out, it's important to really to work with practitioners on this. It was really a co-developed model with practitioners, with communities, with law enforcement agencies, and to understand also what do local publics expect from community policing, what is important for them, what needs to be achieved, and how do we demonstrate the success of community policing. And understand what are the elements that are shared across contexts, between communities, between policing communities, and between countries, and where might there be different flavors across. And then also capture, for instance, different user requirements using this model. So what are expectations for different features? If you think about technologies for community policing, what are different conditions of acceptance between communities? And of course, we also translate down into something more practical, which unfortunately I don't really have the time to get into. So Unity also developed some game-based training for communities, awareness raising for community issues and tensions. So we had quite a large program around what community policing can be and should be and how to support it. But I want to finish here with this overview on the conceptual element and of Unity, and leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Saskia. Yeah, and time flies when you start talking, huh? And it's very much details to be shared. So thank you for your presentation. I quickly hand over to Ivan to give us a short recap of the Inspector project.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. Hope so. This is Ivan Luis Martinez Villalobos. I am project manager from Valencia Local Police. I belong to the project management division of my institution. Thank you so much for the opportunity from CERIS of organizing this interesting event regarding community policing, which is one of our pillars regarding our policy strategy here in Valencia. I will try my best to be quick because we only have maybe 8 minutes, 7 minutes, something like this. First of all, I would like to show you our point of view as a law enforcement agency. We were involved in such a great community policing project, which was INSPEC. But first of all, I would like to put you in a situation, what is community policing for Valencia Local Police? Then I will focus in new technologies and what is the next generation community policing for us, as an example, INSPEC project. And last but not least, I will talk about the future of community policing with 2 examples, KOBAN and BTL. Just for putting you in situation, we are local police here in Spain, but we are a holistic police because we have all the competencies that a national police force would have abroad in Europe. We are 1,600 police officers, and 230 of them are community policing officers, which supposes that it's a pillar, a strategic pillar for us, because it's a specific profile that we use to be in touch with the people and also to gather all the information which can be transformed into intelligence if we extract rapidly all the data. The main functions are citizen information. They act as liaison officers with the main representatives of our society, the schools, neighborhood associations, mental associations, NGOs, migration, etc. They must have knowledge of their respective areas of districts. They prevent crime, and also this is quite relevant nowadays. They practice this. They apply, let's say, the police mediation to solve conflicts in order to anticipate for reaction. They work in the prevention, and also they have the role of education. They are main actors in the life of the youth, because they explain not only police topics but also topics regarding convivence, social media, drug prevention, etc. So they are quite active in the social life in Valencia. But why we arrived to this point here in Spain. At the beginning, in the 50s of the last century, we suffered with the regime of Franco. Our police model was based on direct intervention. It was more repressive, more reactive. Then later on in the democracy, we introduced the reactive model. At the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s, the community policing model was established. It was imported from the UK successfully, I think, because of multidisciplinary factors like, living in Spain, the social life or in the street. It required more police presence physically to share all the concerns from the society. And then 10 years ago, approximately more or less like the Unity project, we got involved in Inspect project as the next level of community policing. We wanted as law enforcement agency to provide the public with a better service. And in order to improve our public service, we wanted to introduce new technologies. And that was the reason that we involved Inspect project, thanks to the European Commission, obviously. It was the first part of the next generation community policing model that we established here in Valencia. The other part is nowadays. We are part of the consortium, both of KOBAN project and BTL project. From my humble opinion, they are the evolution of this kind of new technologies applied to community policing, also from Horizon Europe. So all of this thanks to our department. We are Rara Avis here in Valencia. We are just 5 people from 1,600 dedicated exclusively to manage our participation in European project. I think it's quite necessary nowadays in the law enforcement agencies, because if not, you are far from the scope of what is happening regarding the new technologies. So thanks to the European Commission, the law enforcement agencies, we have the opportunity to know what is happening, to develop something tangible and to share all the knowledge with the public. And what is next generation community policing? It's a concept based, in my opinion, in 6 pillars, let's say. We want to achieve this trust-based engagement. We want to build long-term relationships with communities through transparency, accountability, and consistent presence. Secondly, we make decisions thanks to the data. We use data analytics, we make predictive insights, evidence-based practice to identify risks, etc. Obviously, as community policing officers, we have to collaborate with all kinds of institutions here in Valencia, in our case, not only at local level, but also at a national level. We work together with schools, NGOs, community leaders, etc. Then I highlighted this point because the technology-enabled policing, this is the disruptive element regarding next generation community policing. How can we improve an already successful model here, at least in Valencia, the community policing model we have already, thanks to new technologies. New technologies could help us to be more present in the social network. They can provide us new solutions like artificial intelligence, like in KOBAN or BTL, digital platforms, mobile applications like in Inspect, and real-time information sharing to enhance situational awareness and responsiveness. And also, we are facing new challenges in this century. What is a community nowadays? We, in an anachronical way, a community is something physical, tangible, but nowadays a community could be in the cloud. So what is community policing? How can we apply this concept of or strategy of community policing in the social network? How can we put on the cloud, let's say, a model of community policing officers? This is something that we have to guess or to fix this gap. Then we have the problem-oriented and preventive approach, and last but not least, the inclusive and community private safety. This is more or less the concept of our view from next generation community policing. The first step to getting this next generation community policing was Inspect. It was my first project. It was at the same time as Unity, as I remember. It began in 2016 and lasted for 3 years, counting with 18 partners from 8 different countries. And it aimed to include new solutions, technological solutions, or develop a sustainable framework for community policing that effectively address and promote seamless collaboration between the police and the community using a social media environment. The thing is that it was so practical. It was so practical and gave a lot of means and solutions not only for the public itself, but also for the community policing officers. As lessons learned, we realized that the people was eager to collaborate with the police officers. At the beginning of the project, we thought that the people would be more reluctant to participate and to collaborate with the police. But at the end, we realized that the feedback was so great, and also from our community policing officers, because they saw it as an opportunity to improve new solutions and to improve the way the people was communicating with them, and also on the opposite, how the community policing officer could use these technologies to communicate directly with the citizenship. So we created this ecosystem, this sustainable community policing ecosystem, highly performant, sophisticated, but at the same time it was so intuitive, at least from the opinion of the users. Look, in our case, at least 10 years ago, the people was able to contact the police just stopping the community policing officer walking down the street, or just stopping one patrol car in the street, or just calling by phone to the 112 or 092, which is the number of local police. But thanks to these applications, they were able to use the mobile device to share specific reports. For instance, they were able to share pictures, audio recordings, video of incidents that were happening in the streets in a real time. So our public service was quick, was effective, and it gave us a new opportunity to boost our communication with the society. One of the problems that we found in these days was the reluctance of the youth. It was quite complicated to gain, let's say, their trust in the police. So we developed serious games to try to engage them into this project. It was quite successful. I will show you a couple of examples of the serious games that we developed in this project. And this is several of the solutions that we developed. You can see on the left of the picture, this is the secure portal. It was supervised by a police officer, and it included the geospatial complex event processing engine, like a mapping of the city with pins, with the hierarchy of the more relevant events that were happening during the pilot. This is a screenshot of the pilot in Valencia. Also, it was one of the first occasions or cases that we use the case-based reasoning. It's a prediction of what will happen based on the information provided by the citizens. So regarding nowadays the algorithm and the artificial intelligence, how it is working with the information, it was so disruptive in these times 2 years ago. How could we predict the events in the future based on the data hosted in the data warehouse? Also, we use, as I mentioned, this mobile application, both for the citizens and also the police officers, because we separated, let's say, how the people was able to communicate events and how the police officers were able to communicate between them, to share information, interesting information, and also creating communities for, let's say, neighborhood associations, mercat associations, to try, for instance, to solve specific problems. And it was quite helpful for everyone. This is an example of the two serious games we developed in Spain. The first one was Crime Spotters, and it gave the opportunity for the youth to play whether if they want to be a notorious criminal. It was more successful, this profile, or detective, in case they wanted to solve specific challenges. The user was able to upload pictures of the real world and to manage events. And on the other hand, we have the police resource force, in which the user could take the role of chief of a police station and discover the difficulty of managing the lack of resources that the police officer would have. So it engaged a lot with youth. And this is the summary of our pilot in Valencia. On the left part of the picture, in number 1, you can see the diagram of the people involved. We involved approximately almost 400 people. The majority of them were students. So it was so successful because, as I mentioned, they were so reluctant to work with us. Beneath, you can find a map of the area that was affected for the pilot. We selected the specific community policing officers who were in touch with all the citizens, and they engaged them, and we had to train all of them, both the police officers and also the citizens, in using the solutions. And in the second point, you can see our target groups. They were neighborhood associations, they were merchant associations and commerces, shops. and the schools and educational centers. Thanks to Inspect, we were able to improve the interaction with the citizenship with the new ways of communication that Inspect created. To increase the commitment of the main social stratus, we discovered that they were, again, eager to collaborate with us. Also, at the beginning, we have so many doubts regarding this. We created new communicative channels during these 3 years, were so useful, but the lessons learned, we discovered that it was a high volume of information. Nowadays, it would be appropriate because we have algorithms and artificial intelligence to process all the information, but in these days, 10 years ago, it was quite overwhelming, all the information we gathered through these solutions. And as a summary, we think our strategy here in Valencia, we think that thanks to the projects of the European Commission and the predisposition or the flexibility of institutions like tiny law enforcement agencies, plus the involvement of the police officers, this is the core of the research and development and innovation in law enforcement agencies. This is my last slide regarding what is the future of community policing. I think we are in the right way, participating in this kind of projects. Just to mention, just KOBAN and BTL COP as an example, they will be explaining it deeply later on. So that's all from my side. Thank you so much for paying attention.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ivan, and giving a good insight into your, well, European activities as well to improve community policing in Valencia. Thank you. So we go on to the ongoing projects that we have right now. And first of all is the KOBAN project. Could the slides be presented, please? Okay. Wonderful. Well, the KOBAN projects, please the next slide then. Yes, very briefly, it's a 19 partners project. Here you can see all of the partners coming from police authorities, research, NGOs. So it's a wide variety of partners. And well, the main objective of KOBAN is to support community policing by delivering a comprehensive and evidence-based and capability-driven framework. And for that, next slide, please. We have a large variety of work packages. We will not cover the whole project in this presentation. We will mainly focus on defining the capabilities for community policing. But as you can see, we will also developing and testing all kinds of technological solutions and to see how that will work out. Next slide, please. Just here, just to indicate the 7 pilots that we are planning to conduct within KOBAN, and we will be communicating about these results in due time when these pilots have been succeeded. But as indicated, we will now focus on the capability model and the work that has been done in this respect so far. So I'm happy to first give over to Luc and then to Arnoud.
Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so I guess just to ground, as Marcel's briefly said, KOBAN, one of the key aims here is to define future-proof community policing capabilities. Key consideration here being, digital online platforms and environments and their introduction via communications between communities. And we're also interested here in kind of the intersection of different concepts for delivering this community policing. So, for example, offline and online environments, reactive, proactive, and coactive policing styles, as well as alternatives to incarceration. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, I'll be mainly talking about the desk study today. There is different data collection methods that kind of took place across the work package, but I'll mostly be focusing on the desk study findings. So next slide, please. So yeah, to start off with an overview of what we found for community policing today in 2025-26, we identified in the literature, we found a total of 66 different terms that were used to describe either community policing or adjacent policing strategies. We found that these terms, they often described kind of similar policing styles, but sometimes containing maybe slightly different core focuses of the community policing aims and objectives, which was also often illustrated in the names themselves. So for KOBAN, in order to kind of resolve this conundrum and deal with this variation of terminology, we'll be utilizing, as Saskia said in her presentation, the CAP model from Unity, which basically synthesizes the concept and draws a consistent and adaptable model for what it is and how it should be enacted, which will also be useful for KOBAN for the pilots and the transferability of capabilities. So on with the overview, we also found that mobile applications are specifically used for communication purposes have become very central to most modern community policing efforts, and this is something KOBAN aims to build on with its App Factory. And finally, there was still today quite an overrepresentation of US-based sources in the literature, so I guess it's just a wary point when we transfer these over to the European context, just see the cultural fit and these kind of considerations. Next slide, please. Okay, so briefly, kind of the framework of findings of how we dealt with the desk study. We were interested in kind of community policing methods, which we broke down into several categories. First off, we were interested in technologies and tools. So we found kind of three main categories of technology types that we use for community policing nowadays, being communication technologies, mapping, as well as AI. For communication, there was, apps, dedicated community policing apps, the use of social media, as well as kind of a wider variety of more specialized, what's called like neighborhood digital platforms in the literature. We're also interested in mapping technologies. So for crime hotspot mapping, this could be used for tools, for example, safety apps for citizens themselves or internal systems for police forces. And finally, we found AI to be a bit more of a ubiquitous kind of technology that could be used to enhance other tools, kind of acting as a force multiplier technology in this way. So then we also looked into strategies and practices of police forces. So yeah, CP as well as adjacent policing strategies such as evidence-based policing, smart policing. We looked into specific initiatives that are still ongoing today, such as Neighbourhood Watch in the UK or the more recent local safety contracts from Portugal. And we also looked at community practices for more specific purposes and scenarios, for example, reassurance policing or restorative practices. We were then looking at the modes of delivery and how these kind of interact in delivering community policing. So first off, we looked at online, offline, as well as hybrid approaches. And we found today hybrid approaches are by far the most common. And we define this as a mixture, so basically using online activities, but still linked to physical locations and activities. And the most common use for this was applications for communities. We also looked into kind of, classic reactive, proactive, coactive policing, finding that today these are often kind of ideal types, but they often overlap in practice. And we find that police forces actually have to perform kind of a multiplicity of these functions at any one time. And finally, yeah, we're interested specifically in KOBAN on alternatives to incarceration and how this could be used as part of a community policing framework. We found that this was more often used and could be useful for the kind of more complex social issues that are often interlinked as well, such as drug use, homelessness, as well as mental health problems in communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so to wrap up just for the desk study part, some of the key insights we could pull from this research. First of all, it's worth noting that a lot of community policing methods aren't always publicly available or formally published. A lot of kind of grey literature from police forces can often be hard to access, and so often many kind of practical, more detailed hands-on accounts can be limited to find. Another interesting finding we had was that there's recently in the last few years been a massive take-up of community policing in global south countries as well, though we found there was quite a marked difference in an approach here for reasons such as the relationship between communities and the state and the amount of control often given to communities in these contexts is quite different to the European context. We also found that specifically online only community policing methods were still quite a rarity. And this was partly due to the fact that it was often harder to link them to geographical areas and boundaries, which are obviously often associated with community policing itself. And although we did find a lot of apps currently on the market, they were also deemed often quite insufficient. And this was due to the fact that often their capacity for two-way communication between citizens and police often lacked features that meant that communities could also contribute to that information sharing. So there's kind of quite a gap in the market there still, which hopefully KOBAN is aiming to fill with its app factory. And finally, I think it's worth noting that we found that technology still couldn't completely replace kind of more traditional policing methods. And although technology can often be used to enhance community policing methods, kind of old-fashioned in-person policing, or at least a mixture of that, was often still needed in most kind of problem scenarios. So that's basically a quick rundown of the desk study. So I'd be happy to hand over to our partner from TNO to talk a bit more about the capabilities.
Thank you, Luke. Next slide, please. So the capability model itself, as Luke and Saskia already explained, it builds upon the CAP model that Saskia mentioned, but also other European projects like the 6 pillars, where Ivan was mentioning pillars for community policing. The 6 here are trust building as a foundation. It's mentioned a lot. Timely information exchange to also manage expectations, accountability, community cohesion, engagement and partnership, and organizational transformation, which is both internal transformation as police or partners, but also external on communities that are changing. We contemplated on maybe other pillars as capabilities for this model, such as cultural awareness, which is very important and getting more and more complex within and between communities. And also the technology-led policing Ivan mentioned. But in the end, within discussions and also literature, we decided to put these under these 6 capabilities. So these are a way to both structure all literature and findings, also police practices also from interviews, etc., but also a way to enable and support new community policing practices, as these pillars are the ability or skill to engage in community policing. It's a cube in this sense. So Luke already mentioned that the way of delivering community policing can be both reactive, proactive, and coactive, and the underlying skills or competences, technologies are also linked to these capabilities. So it's a way of structuring and both enabling community policing. So next slide, please. So in KOBAN, we have already done a lot, but are still engaging in some of these activities. So please, previous slide. Thank you. So so this is an overview of all these stock taking activities. Luke already mentioned the literature study. Inventory of methods is done within practitioners. It has already been done, but also to you as participants. If you have practices that we might not know of, we can add them and label them and structure them to be able to share them across other countries and contexts. We've conducted a lot of interviews, which I'll mention shortly. And another addition in KOBAN project was looking at alternatives to incarceration. So also a lot of documents are gathered, also from police practices and policies and strategies. Workshops were held, citizen surveys are done, the same as Saskia mentioned, of get their perspective. And a future horizon scanning was done to look at future capabilities. And then a cultural transferability guide, which is also becoming part of this capability model to be able to transfer this knowledge and these capabilities to different cultures. And last but not least, this capability model and all of this vast knowledge will be gathered and then disseminated and available through a knowledge base, which I'll end this session. So next slide, please. So a couple of examples. We've collected in the forums, we've collected where LEAs and their partners have entered a lot of different strategies, practices, and tools and technologies that are already used. So we're still collecting, but we've already got a vast number of different practices from different countries. Different technologies are used and all structured in a way that it's easy to find and also can be disseminated and used whenever you might need it in a certain context and a certain goal and target group. So next slide, please. So then the interviews were a way to dig deeper into what we found through literature, but also these different methods and strategies to really look and hear from police practitioners themselves on what they encounter and struggle with, or what good practices are and why they might be good practices. So 31 interviews in 11 countries, and not only with LEAs, but also their partners. Also local governments, national governments in some cases, and international even. And the results refer to a lot of different things. So they were categorized in these 9 categories. Of course, the availability of resources and other things are very common. So I think this will apply to all, but the differences per country and differences per police organizations or partners are of course there. Next slide, please. To give you some examples. So what is very often mentioned is that community policing is perceived as an add-on rather than a core function, meaning that if capabilities are scarce, community policing is one of the activities that might not be put to practice because other things are considered more of a core function and more important. The digital tools, Luke already mentioned that as well. Although they may ease personal pressure, they cannot replace community policing in a traditional sense. So the human factor is very important. Community policing is often shaped by governance structures or legal structures, but it's difficult to measure. So also scientific knowledge is very scarce on what it leads to. So that is also a reason that it's difficult to prioritize. So considering the time, I'm not gonna go into the other examples. I think these will be shared. So next slide, please. Looking into the future was a little bit more difficult, and that's where we got help from another European project, the AHEAD project, to play serious games with 2 groups, each of 6 participants, in total 12, of several representatives to look at, well, what could the future look like? And this method was already developed in that project, and we use it for community policing to look at how society could evolve, but also how technology could evolve and what the role of community policing in that would be. And again, a snapshot of some results from those sessions were that the human factor, although technology will increase, the human factor does remain very important, but of course will be very different from today. AI might be involved, or even robotics, but the human factor will remain important. And also the public-private partnerships are very important. Of course, technologies emerge and they will be developed and offered by private partners, but it's very important to partner with them and also to see how policing can play a role in that, and also very locally, that's important. And then the last point, which Saskia already mentioned in her presentation, is what is a community? So not only looking from it from a local perspective, so a neighborhood might be a community of communities in that sense, but also online communities, and it's getting more and more complex in the European context because of migration and other developments that have really emerged in the last decade or so. So it really becomes difficult to understand each other and what's your definition of communities and how to engage with it. Next slide, please. So the capability model is not only a way of structuring all this knowledge, but also as a decision support tool for new community policing efforts. So this is a way also, the KOBAN project is still ongoing. So also when we'll do the evaluations of the pilots, we'll try to gather all that material in a very structured way and add that to the whole repository of knowledge, where methods, tools, practices, and even training, which are developed now as well, and also in a structured way. And the KOBAN Knowledge Support Hub, which is currently under development. I'll show a last slide on the next slide as an example, where we are looking for 3 ways to support this knowledge dissemination. One is the keyword search, so you can enter whatever you would like, just like you would do in an online search. You can filter on all these aspects related to the capability model aspects. Or we are still developing a large language model, which could help summarize all these findings, because we know practitioners won't read scientific papers and they might need a small aspect of that, maybe even in your own language. So this is still a work in progress. And next slide, please. I'll show a short sample of this tool. So here you'll see the elements of the KOBAN capability model, where it's not only about the 6 pillars, the capabilities, but also related to community types, language issues, or background, gender, etc. But the idea being that you can ask any question in the end through this knowledge hub, just like you would do on a ChatGPT interface, and get the answers you're looking for. So we're still in a testing phase for that, but once it's available, we'll reach out to you. And the question to you all is, if you have any material that can be added to this knowledge hub, please let us know. So on that, next slide, please. That's my last slide. Thank you very much. I think
all right.
now to Jill and Melissa.
Thank you, Arnold and Luke. And indeed, next one, and I hope that everybody has still sufficient energy after this, all these informations. So please, next one is for Jill and Melissa.
Greetings. Thank you very much, everybody, and to CERIS for the excellent webinar that you're providing, to Marcel, to Nada for the great overview that you gave of the key components of community policing and the work represented in the other projects, which I found fascinating. So I'm speaking from the BTL COP program. So we're aiming to build trust between communities and police to address poverty-driven crime across Europe in particular. My name's Jill. I'm the principal investigator. I'm a professor and a research centre lead at the University of Greenwich. Handing on to Melissa to introduce herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and hello, everybody. My name's Melissa Pepper. I'm a co-investigator on the BTL COP project, and I'm an associate professor of criminology here at the University of Greenwich.
Thank you. Could you move to the next slide, please? So the BTL COP program, or Building Trust and Leadership in a Police Community of Practice, is specifically dedicated to community policing. And from that point of view, I'm kind of quite honoured and very pleased to let those know who don't know about this project that it's built on more than 90 plus years experience in London, Valencia, Madrid and Zagreb. So from that point of view, we're coming from a very experienced engagement with current police authorities already practicing community policing, and we're coming to try to see what we can do in terms of various aspects we'd like to build on and enhance, particularly about building trust and leadership. Could I ask you to move to the next slide, please? So from that point of view, just thinking of that and the key objectives of this webinar, so from a European research and innovation point of view, as well as contributing from the UK, that focus on building trust and leadership in terms of longitudinal community policing in neighbourhood communities of practice is really coming from a background in which we've had around 23 years of working with a local community of practice to build trust, and have found extensive evidence from both police and communities that that actually works. And I think from the point of view of the KOBAN focus that you're putting forward, one of the focuses around the human factor, that's important. So trust as an operational security capability of community policing, of course, is a core enabler of crime prevention, intelligence sharing and cooperation, as we know. From that point of view, we know the evidence already to some extent, which is that stronger trust directly improves crime reporting, particularly amongst vulnerable communities, and also to that extent, potentially effective policing. So in terms of state of the art and your wish in this webinar to focus on that, so from our point of view, the police communities of practice model in an observatory framework, which is measuring emerging risks, begins to look at deeper knowledge. So the kind of possibly weak, possibly unheard, possibly hidden signals, and the deeper levels of tacit knowledge that people wouldn't ordinarily share is kind of coming through this longitudinal face-to-face, not always face-to-face, but including digital as well, but the human factor element in terms of that relational engagement and communication over a long time. So that begins to lead to this understanding of poverty-related criminal exploitation that one might not necessarily otherwise identify. So it's a model for building deep trust. In terms of community policing capability needs, then, we also wanted to come from a perspective of measuring and finding evidence, locating evidence, providing evidence, not just on trust in the police from communities, but also looking at to what extent police felt safe in their communities. And so that element of trust the other way as well is something that we hope that MOPAC in London will be helping us with this, because they've done some initial work on that. The trust in neighbourhood groups model is the community of practice we're looking at, and the aporophobia awareness, I'll come back to it in a moment, but it's essentially stigmatization of poverty. The local to global poverty-driven criminal pathways is therefore what we want to focus on. And what we realized when we began to ask police authorities about this is that something that has not necessarily been captured. In terms of potential innovation uptake of research results, we're looking at the Ting model providing that, but also the BondMate, which is a digital device. Next slide, please. So the problems that we're aiming to address, challenge one is declining trust in police, particularly in vulnerable communities. And I think this is very well documented and there's extensive evidence on it. Challenge two then links with that in terms of criminal poverty-related exploitation linked to aporophobic hate crime. And again, coming back to the idea that with the stigmatization of poorer communities, in this concept of aporophobia, one is beginning to recognize the vulnerabilities that people have, not only into being exploited, but actually potentially being taken into a lifetime of crime. From that point of view, challenge three comes in, which is to what extent those intelligence gaps between police and community are actually being captured in terms of local to global crime pathways. We found that the evidence was that not always did that take place. So the police authorities that we talked to said to us the three challenges come together in terms of limited law enforcement agency and resources necessarily to support investigation of this on the longer term between local to global crime, and therefore some of these key factors not being addressed. Next slide, please. From that point of view, then, we're aiming to come up with these results, and as KOBAN was saying, it's in progress. Ting COP model is one of them, as I've mentioned, the BondMate, which is a digital device, specifically an alert system, an alarm system for highly vulnerable individuals who would not be able necessarily to use a mobile phone, for example. And the trust measurement framework, we're going to be looking at including bidirectional trust, which is highly unusual and which will be something that we'll be negotiating with police authorities on. Community Policing Intelligence Toolkit aims to be a specific contribution which is transformational. The Security Helix from Crowd Helix will disseminate and communicate to their many, many networks. And the Trainers program effectively will be brand new in terms of bringing some of these social and experiential elements of the human factor in from long-term communities. The improved capabilities we're looking at, therefore, is not only addressing crime and poverty, but also aporophobia and trust-based community of practice. Can I ask you to move to the next slide, please? So what is this word, aporaphobia? It sounds strange, doesn't it? Well, it's a phobia of the poor and comes from Cortina's work in Spain, Adele Cortina in Valencia, actually. And she writes a very interesting book in the 90s, which is in its many different editions, saying, why do we reject the poor instead of helping them? So from that point of view, beginning to draw an attention to this as opposed to any other kind of racism or, gender-related violence or to do with transphobia or any other of those aspects, begin to say, actually, there's something around the stigmatization and the hatred of the poor, which is linked to shame and which is linked then to a vulnerability not only to hate crime and to criminal exploitation in local to global crime pathways. The BondMate tool is developed by our colleagues in Barcelona specifically to address a situation in which homeless people were kicked to death. There were several examples of this in Spain, and as a result, he wanted to develop a BondMate tool, which is something that a person who's highly vulnerable would be able to use to contact authorities to help them. So from that point of view, it's a trust-building digital tool. Next slide, please. Finally, before I hand on to Melissa from me, this initial section, the Trust in Neighbourhood Group COP model, or Communities of Practice, or Community-Oriented Policing, or COP simply, which operates on 3 levels, that word, is a trust in neighbourhood groups model. So it's a kind of vehicle for the enablement of a kind of corrective and a community-based creation of trust together in terms of not only the mutual respect we've talked about, but also procedural justice, which Melissa will talk about in a second. It's a knowledge sharing vehicle, which is around community police intelligence gathering and building trust over the longer term. So the first COP effectively has been in London for 23 years, has been very effective. We're aiming to roll this out across our partners and to negotiate with them how this fits into the existing work that they have so much experience in doing, or to recommend to us other solutions which could be part of this. So the TINCOP origin I did in 2006, and a project I did then to build a community of practice and to develop trust on this for a considerable time. Handing on to Melissa, and the next slide, please.
Thank you, Jill. So there's a lot that we already know about community policing and how under the right conditions, when it's operating in the right spaces, how it can increase public trust and confidence. It can have these positive impacts on public perceptions of the police, strengthened relationships between officers and the public, increased perceptions of legitimacy, an enhanced ability to police by consent, increased feelings of safety, reduced perceptions of disorder, and a sense of increased collective efficacy. So this shared belief between all participants that they're working towards this collective and common goal. But what we also know, both from this project and from our colleagues who have presented other projects, is that long-term sustainable engagement can be really difficult to achieve in the fast-paced environment that is policing, in this really resource-challenged environment. And our colleagues from KOBAN spoke about community policing often being perceived as a bit of an add-on or rather than a core function. And this is certainly something that I've observed both academically, and for many years I worked for the Metropolitan Police Authority, now the London Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, which is the body that oversees the strategic direction of London's Metropolitan Police Service. It's always the first to go. And interestingly, the Home Office white paper that was published just January this year, the white paper is called From Local to National, a New Model for Policing. It talks about, and it kind of recognises this need for a strong, visible, locally accountable police presence, and how this can tackle issues around restoring confidence in policing. But it also talks about visible neighbourhood policing in the UK context as being diminished and deprioritised. And I thought that these were really powerful words when we think about community policing in the UK, certainly, and likely other parts of the world. Next slide, please. So what we have observed, myself just from working on this project, and Jill from a number of decades of working closely with one of our brilliant project partners, Second Wave, who are a youth arts charity that works with young people and also brings in police officers as part of it, is that when the police and communities have this opportunity to come together, when they've got this space to share knowledge and experience on a long-term sustainable basis, it fosters an environment that we think really speaks to the heart of many of those benefits of community policing that I mentioned on the previous slide. And this opportunity for building, or in some cases rebuilding, trust and confidence in a community of practice, it offers this bi-directional approach. This is both from the police to the community, but also from the community to the police. And this trust in neighbourhood groups or team model that Jill presented really offers this opportunity and provides a framework around developing these communities of practice in a community policing context. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a word on how our work, what we've been focusing on so far. We're only 6 months or so into this project, so we feel very young compared to some of our other more established projects. But the work packages which have been our main focus so far have been work package 2, where we're observing emerging crime pathways. This is quite a busy work package which involves exploring community policing models across our partners, across our partner countries, looking at those relationships between poverty and crime, and really crucially developing that trust measurement framework, which is going to be a real staple throughout our project. In work package 3, which is ongoing at the moment, that's more of a technical development of this bondmate device, which provides an alert system between vulnerable, particularly street homeless communities, and trusted authority figures. And currently we are working to develop ways of co-designing and consulting with the communities that will be using that technology. Next slide, please. And just a bit of a look ahead to what sits ahead of us over the remainder of the project. Work package 4 is going to be a really crucial work package where we start to develop a lot of our learning into training products, things that can sustain longer than the life of the project itself, in terms of training in trust building, leadership for both police and the community, communities of practice training, and a Train the Trainers programme. In work package 5, we are looking at testing and piloting the community intelligence toolkits that we are building, and continuing to measure and monitor that trust to look at the impact of some of these products that we will be developing as part of BTL COP. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll hand back to Jill for the first part of our emerging themes, then I'll take the last part. Thanks, Jill.
Yes, so rounding up, because I know that the webinar is very tightly timed. Thank you, Melissa. Tacit understanding, I mentioned that, and I think that's to do with the longitudinal knowledge sharing approach in terms of, and including dialogue and problem solving as well, which is via diverse streams of thought and experience, building practice together, which is improvement on previous understanding. So from that point of view, the work that we're suggesting is something that is looking at very deep, long-term kind of restoration, in a sense, of trust in communities, providing safe spaces and building together an understanding that is very deep and is looking together to ensure that police and communities can work in mutual concert in a good way. That relational continuity then, which comes originally, I think, from the CCI project, Cutting Crime Impact, which we are taking forward, meaning then a frequent ongoing contact in a problem-solving dialogue between police and community, and that gradual development of two-way trust and shared leadership. So the leadership for the community comes not just from the police, but also the community themselves. Handing back to Melissa for the final points. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. So other emerging themes which are really coming out so far is this importance of participatory engagement and co-design. Again, this speaks to our team model, trust in neighbourhood groups. This is about shared spaces where officers and the community can engage in meaningful dialogue in a mutually trusting, truthful, kind of intelligent engagement approach. And the important parts of that is frequent, ongoing and consistent contact between our communities and our police officers, which is something we've observed through this second wave youth art project, one of our partners. And finally, music to the academics' ears, of course, that there are strong theoretical foundations throughout this project. Jill mentioned earlier, but we see the importance of procedural justice, a process by which there is fairness, accountability and transparency throughout encounters, and the importance of experiential learning, and a lot coming through about social identity, groups identifying commonality between each other and across groups, which really supports this trusted neighbourhood group collaborative model between communities and the police. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jill and Melissa, for a very interesting presentation, and we really look forward to learning more about your future results that you will be delivering.
Thank you.
We are a few minutes ahead of schedule, so please bear with us. And I'm more than happy to hand over now to our Scottish colleagues, Kieran, Heather and Donald, to explain about the VOW project, followed by Donald's insights into the citizen's perspective of community policing. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcel, and afternoon, everyone. I'm Kieran Dougal. I'm the Chief Inspector with Police Scotland and the Head of Partnerships within Edinburgh Division, and I have the pleasure to work alongside Heather and Donnie on the VOW project, which is getting presented today. And the project is recognised as best practice in Scotland, including referencing a National Harm Prevention Inspection by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, as well as receiving numerous recognitions for what is really a truly innovative way in changing the way that we think about prevention, and also highlights the integral role that lived experience plays in our ability to understand and engage with individuals at risk of criminality, substance abuse, or making poor life decisions. And Donnie will cover some of the background and his role within the VOW, which relies on the courage and bravery of himself, Jules and Kev, who are our three peer mentors, sharing their own stories, their own experience, and really opening up the door to allow us as police to engage with people that we wouldn't normally be able to engage with, to build relationships, and really get to the root cause of what is causing the criminality or the harmful behaviour. And Heather will discuss a wee bit around how that's done as part of the project. And it's really led the way in addressing numerous issues, from substance abuse, employment issues, to reduce criminality and saving lives in many instances. Today's input will be a very quick rundown just of some of the successes that's been shown, but I'll pass over to Heather, who will cover some of the wider logistics of the VOW and how it works. Heather, I think you're on mute.
There we go. I'm just going to share my screen, share the PowerPoint, if somebody can let me know if that's... is that working, Donald?
Yeah, that's working, Heather.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the invite along today and the very interesting inputs previous to ours. I am Heather Clark. I am a lowly PC in Edinburgh Division, very much boots on the ground, and I'm going to just run through the kind of project that we're involved in at the moment. Obviously, the Chief Inspector is our gaffer, is our boss. We have a sergeant as well, but unfortunately she's not able to be here today, so that's why you've got me. I'm conscious, being from Scotland, that we speak very quickly, so I'll try and slow it down, but if I am going too fast, please let me know. So we are the VOW project, based in the city centre of Edinburgh. A brief overview of the project. We could talk all day about what we do and the nuances of what we do and the flexibility that we have within our project, but this is a very, very brief overview, hopefully to give you a flavour of what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and kind of some of the reasons why. So about us, we are a very small team. Like I said, based in the city centre of Edinburgh. There's 3 police officers, myself, Emily and Ewan, and we're led by a sergeant. And we work alongside, hand in hand, in the same office with 3 peer mentors who are seconded to Police Scotland through the charity Aid and Abet. So those peer mentors are Donald, Kevin and Julianne. Very, very briefly on the funding, because I know that this question always comes up. How do you fund a project like yourself? And it's very much a collaborative approach. Police Scotland provide funding and resource in the form of the police officers who work in the project as part of the kind of Scottish Government Police Scotland budget. The core funding that we receive is from a Scottish Government-led fund called Cashback for Communities, where proceeds of crime is taken off the street, goes back into the Scottish Government fund, which is redistributed around communities. And our project is one of those who luckily has successfully applied for funding from that cashback fund, and we've just got another 3 years funding secured, so that's good. And then another third of our funding comes from a City of Edinburgh Council-based fund, which is Edinburgh Drug and Alcohol Partnership, and they really focus on support for drug harm prevention. I'm not going to have time to touch on the kind of drug harm prevention work in its entirety today. I'm going to focus on the VOW project, but it is a side shot that we could potentially present on at another time or another webinar, as you'll well be aware that Scotland hold the record for the worst drug-related death record in Europe, which we are very much not proud of. So who do we work with? Anybody really. The core funding provided, and to align with the cashback funding, states 16 to 25. So anybody within that area we are able to work with. We do have a lot of flexibility around that. So if we have a 14 or 15-year-old who's on the cusp of criminality, that we think will be a slow burner, that are going to come with us, then we can work with them. And likewise, if somebody is 25, 26 and joins the project, then we can continue to work with them until they're a wee bit older. They have to live in Edinburgh or within reason the nearby surrounding areas, as long as the majority of their offending is within the city. A lot of our Lothians, so we have the city of Edinburgh and then the surrounding area we would refer to as the Lothians. A lot of people do come into the city centre to commit their criminality, or they end up coming in and getting in bother. So if it is affecting the policing model within City of Edinburgh, then yeah, of course we would try and work with them in order to reduce that offending. One key to the project is it's completely voluntary. It's not court ordered. It's not a bail condition imposed by the police. We are really looking to engage with people who show that willingness to vow to change their offending, to look at addressing if they've got addiction problems, anything like that. They really need to show a willingness to change, and that's where we find the greater successes, is that, you know, they don't need to engage with us. It's completely voluntary, but we are a support that is offered to them to help them along the way. The only kind of exclusions are if you've got significant domestic or significant sexual offending charges. The reasons behind that are A, to safeguard ourselves and in particular our peer mentors if we're going out and engaging with somebody 2-to-1. And equally, we have our separate kind of public protection units who have safeguarding teams for domestics and safeguarding teams and offender management for sexual offences. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we aim to do, this is a very simplistic depiction of what we aim to do, but stage 1 is really establish rapport, create that positive adult relationship, that positive and safe environment, and just really get to know the young person. We generally deploy 1 cop and 1 peer mentor, so we'll take the young people out for a coffee, for a McDonald's, and just try and start breaking down those barriers and building up that relationship. And we're looking to get like that little glimmer of what do you want to do, how can we unlock your potential, what are you into, and also at that stage, at the kind of stage 1, we're starting to explore like the root causes of behaviour, the root causes of offending, and we're very open and honest with them that it is a police project and we do need to start kind of challenging negative attitudes and behaviours, and we don't shy away from that in stage 1. We have to have that kind of transparent and open and honest conversation from the get-go to set those boundaries, but also to kind of just make it clear as to what they're coming into and what the expectations are. Stage 2, we continue to kind of build on that that trust and that rapport. And we start at this stage to build a personalised plan, focusing on kind of structure and routine. But it's very much the young person's. They'll tell us what they want, what they're into, what their interests are, what they would like to achieve, and then we'll come in and try and put a bit more structure around that and allow them to see what that potentially could look like. A lot of that is to look at education, training courses, life skills, working environments. We look at like kind of their health and their well-being, and do we need to try and build their confidence and self-esteem a little bit. And a lot of the time, the young people that we work with, they don't know what they want to do. They're just kind of a little bit stuck and just going along with the flow. They might not have engaged in formal education since kind of primary age, so adult literacy and numeracy can often be a challenge. And this it's at this part that I think the project really comes into its own, because it is so, it's tailor-made for the individual. I'll refer to the board throughout this presentation, because we have all the names of our young people on the board, and they're all at a completely different stage. So what success might look like for you and I, or for one of our young people, success looks very differently for somebody who is maybe at primary school literacy, numeracy, has low self-esteem, low confidence, maybe has like is neurodivergent, is really struggling to even step out their front door. Success for them looks very differently to what we might perceive as success for an 18, 19, 20-year-old that, you know, maybe we're caring for. And then we go into stage 3, which is really kind of building their independence and reducing, tapering down the support that they need from us, helping them with their kind of life admin, if you like, their housing, financial management, peer stability, relationships, well-being, and then seeing that they're starting to make those positive choices independently. And it's at that stage that we'll be looking to, you know, take a step away and letting them go out into the world and hopefully thrive. Timeline on this, there is no such thing. Again, the beauty about our project is there is no timeline. Some people come on board with the project and they want to get into work, they want to go to college, they're very clear on their goals, so they might be with us for 6 months and they just need that helping hand. Other people, we've got one person who's been on our board for 6-7 years and is going through that roller coaster of life, and but we're always there with that kind of constant stable support to try and kind of, when they're ready to make that change and when they're they're ready to take on a next challenge, then we'll be there to support them. Examples of what we offer. So at the heart of everything we do is we aim to reduce offending. We aim to create positive social pathways, positive relationships, with a view to integrate our young people back into kind of a civilized society, abiding by rules and laws. And that, as I've previously touched on, can look very different to all our different young people who are at different stages. So personal training has been a real success for us. We've managed to link in with a personal trainer through the City of Edinburgh Council gyms. With that comes confidence, self-esteem, a little bit of kind of informal counselling, if you like, through engaging with a professional in that kind of casual environment. We've got access to, private counsellors that provide talking therapy, cognitive behavioural therapy, to really try and help young people who are willing to engage in a counselling service, understand maybe the background that they've been brought up in, the circumstances that they've been brought up in, the choices that they've kind of made. The vast majority of our young people are either from like a care experience background or a low social economic setting. So they've not come from very much. A lot of them have been exposed to kind of chaotic lifestyles in their childhood, so they know no better. So if they're ready to address that in counselling, we have access to counselling. We've got great partnership working with the City of Edinburgh Council, Action for Children, education services to help with employability certifications for getting on a work site. We also have access to a music studio down in Leith, a fantastic social enterprise called Turn the Tables. And again, it allows young people to go into that professional environment, express themselves in a different way. And again, the feedback that we get from the young people is that's their kind of counselling, that's their form of counselling, being able to express themselves through music and lyrics. And really, I suppose this slide demonstrates that nothing's off the table. Anything that the young person shows an interest in that would be a positive social activity, we have the autonomy to explore and to try and get somebody on our books that can help us with that. Why do we do it? And I've popped this slide in because a lot of the time, this is one of the questions that we ask. It very much sounds like, oh, the VOW project, you're just sending people to get a personal trainer to the gym, you're taking them go-karting, you're taking them to McDonald's, like you're rewarding bad behavior. We don't see it like that at all. We see it in trying to break that cycle through diversion, intervention and positive social activities. Through my personal experience of being a police constable for 13 years, and mostly community policing in the city centre of Edinburgh, I'm very much tired of locking the same people up for the same offences, putting them into the criminal justice system for them to maybe go into jail for a short period of time, come straight back out into the community, and that cycle just continues. And I'm sure that is a pattern that our colleagues across Europe have also seen and can also speak to, this endless cycle. If you're out in the community with no support, you've got underlying addiction or social issues, they remain uncontrolled, no support for them, you default back to your offending, either to fund your addiction or to make ends meet. And before you know it, you see the kind of police intervention, the court intervention, restrictions on liberty, custodial sentences. And what we find is during this time, no circumstances change. There's little or no support in prisons to address like addiction or social issues. In some cases, it gets worse due to boredom or new or old associates. And then they come back out on the street, they're set up for a fail, and the cycle continues. Now, we see it that VOW intervention could happen at any one of these stages. And what we're trying to do is break that cycle. But obviously the work, we mentioned the peer mentors before, the work we do as Police Scotland, as a Police Scotland project, we've tried it in the past in its inception, and it just didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was because police and the uniform is an instant barrier, is an automatic barrier. So that's when our peer mentors are worth their weight in gold, and the project would not work without their lived experience. So I'll pass on to Donald to give you a little overview about his story and how he became involved in the project and what he thinks it's like working with the police. Do I need to mute myself?
Hello everybody, how you doing? Thanks Heather for passing it on to me, and thanks everybody for being here today and hearing a wee bit about the VOW project. I appreciate we've not got a lot of time, so I will fit as much as I can in the short period of time that I've got. But as part of my role on the project, I suppose it's really important that you hear a wee bit about my background and why I'm doing what I'm doing with Police Scotland here in Edinburgh. My background is a bit like a lot of the young people we work with. No, I was brought up in an area that was sort of a lot of poverty. As growing up as a kid, didn't have a lot, and in these areas that we work in, and certainly where I was brought up, there's definitely a negative view of police in the community. And even before I was getting into any trouble, I had a very negative view of policing and how police approached me and my interactions with police. And for a very early age, that view was being shaped really early doors. But I was like some of the young people we work with, I was put into care when I was 13-year-old. I was getting up to stuff in the community. I was getting into a lot of gang stuff, using a lot of weapons, using a lot of drugs, and I got put into care, which I thought was maybe going to be a wee bit of a wake-up call for me. But unfortunately, it wasn't. It just led me on to other things. Once I got back out the community when I was 16, I went back to stay in the area that I was brought up in, and I very quickly found myself in trouble with police again. Luckily, none of the police officers that I work with today, they're all a bit young to have been arresting me back in the day. But I was already at a very early age caught up my cycle, hanging about with the same people, doing the same stuff, and hoping for a different result. But very quickly, I found myself in a Young Offenders Institute, which was not a good place. But again, you know what I mean? I came out, and most of my offending was run about my substance misuse. Whether it was taking drugs or drinking. And I didn't quite click that if I taken the substance misuse away, I would probably stop offending. It took me a long time for that to click. And it took me a long time in and out of prison, in trouble with the police a lot. I went on to do time in adult prison as well as young offenders. All along, my drug using progressed from drinking, smoking weed, to popping ecstasy, right up to taking heroin and cocaine. And heroin was my drug of choice, but I always justified the using of my drugs, and always didn't take responsibility. Sometimes I'd blame the police because I found myself in the cells for getting caught with drugs, or if I'd found myself getting a sentence in prison because again I'd been caught with drugs. There was loads of turning points. There was loads of times when I wanted to change my life. I would come back out and I would manage a bit of abstinence for a small period of time. But I never really had anybody in my life at this point that was positive, and I had no role models. I didn't hate anybody taking me to the side and say things could be a bit differently. I wasn't really showing any compassion. And then it got to the point where I had friends who were overdosing and doing long sentences in prison, and I really didn't want to be the next statistic. As Heather touched upon, we've got a horrendous rate of drug overdose in this country, and a few of my friends have ones who have overdosed in the past, and I really didn't want to be the next person who was going to overdose in my small community. And I tried loads of times before and tried loads of different ways to do it. And eventually a drug worker had spoke to me about going into a rehab facility for 12 weeks, and actually I was resistant against it. I felt 12 weeks was a long time as part of my life, and when he put it like, what else you did, I was like, right, okay, fair point. And I decided to go in there and hopefully come off drugs. And what I didn't realise was coming off the drugs was the easy part. I would go in there, I'd done the 12 weeks, I came off drugs within 2 weeks. So the other 10 weeks is spent working on yourself, doing counselling, doing group therapy, looking at loads of different things, making amends, some of the stuff that we've done in our community and the people that we cared for and loved for. And then you're back out in the community. Even though there was a programme for aftercare for another 2 years after you came out, you were still back in the community. You were back in the place where you were using all the drugs. You're back in the place where you're using all that, where you would offend. And it's quite a scary place. And all my adult life, I hadn't really known anything other than what I'd been doing, taking drugs and getting into trouble. So I very quickly had to find something that I was that was passionate about, something that I really wanted to do. And I struggled to find something. Some of my friends would help out in a recovery cafe or like in a charity shop. And just by luck, a guy approached me about starting up a charity. And it was through the rehab that I'd just completed my 12 weeks. And he wondered if we could use lived experience, guys who had experienced the criminal justice system and had been in prison, supporting other guys that were coming out of prison. And I quite liked the sound of that, and sort of, from there on, myself and quite a few guys that had been in rehab, we set up, went about to set up this charity. And initially it was about trying to prevent homelessness for guys coming out of prison, and it very quickly became this sort of all-round, wrap-round support where, if it was mental health, if they were looking to get into work, if they were looking to get into education. But most of the guys that we were working with were older guys, and they had spent a lot of their time in jail in short-term sentences because of their addiction. So most of the sort of care plan that was put in place when they would come out was to get them into rehab and get them involved with the recovery community in the area. And we became very successful at that. We started gaining a reputation within the city between social work and other third sector charities. And that's how we came to the attention, the VOW project. The VOW project was initially just free police officers. This was probably about 12 years ago. It was just free police officers. And as Heather pointed out, the biggest barrier they had was they were police officers. And if I'm being honest, I had my doubts to even going up and speaking to the police officers myself. My experience had been really, really negative for the police. I'd never came across any positive interaction with a police officer, and I came across a lot of interaction with police in my time, and same with the guys that worked in the charity. All of us had experienced the criminal justice system one shape or another. None of us had a positive experience at the police. Most of that was down to us. And because of our actions invited the police into our lives. But we spoke about it and we decided we still had to hear what they had to say. They wanted to speak to us, and so we went up, and for the very first day we sat down and had a cup of tea with these 3 police officers, and my colleague, he coined the phrase "cops with compassion," because it was the first time in his life we spoke to these cops, and they spoke to us about what they were hoping to achieve. And it was all the same things we were hoping to achieve with the guys that we were working with who were older. The only difference was it was 16 to 25-year-olds. They were all a younger crew. And ultimately, they were trying to prevent these young guys becoming the guys that we were working with further down the line. And 30 years of having an opinion about police was blown out the water with a cup of tea and a chat, and speaking to police as human beings and showing a bit of care and compassion for another human being who was having a really hard time. So why wouldn't we want to be involved? And never in a million years up until that point did I think I would say that I would be willing to work on a police project. We were working with guys who were coming out of prison, and we were worried about how that would be perceived, that we were giving intelligence to police, or in Scotland we call it grassies or snitches. We were sort of a little bit worried, but then we came to realise that people were thinking that maybe they weren't ready to change. There's so much more that I could add to that, but what I would like to say, when I was growing up, I never had a police officer coming over to speaking to me, asking me how I was, coming to play football with me, taking me to a music studio. All the work that we do, ultimately is breaking down the barriers. It's the exact same communities that I grew up with that had this opinion of the police, that we are breaking down the barriers with these young people. And these young people are changing their minds and telling their friends and telling their families. And slowly, but surely, we are changing the opinions of the communities that these young people stay in as well. I really appreciate your time, and I could have went on and on there, but if you have any questions at the end, please fire them over. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Donnie. It's a very overwhelming presentation and really shows, well, what an impact, an intervention can have on somebody's life. Thank you very much. And thanks to you, Heather and Kieran as well.
Just a couple more slides, if that's okay. I'm conscious of the time, but just we'll rattle through. Just show
okay,
some a wee bit of the case studies, so it's worth covering.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's important just to put these case studies up so people kind of read of them. But a lot of the time we don't quantify. A lot of it is anecdotal.
Heather, I think your volume's going in and out.
I don't hear you, Heather. Yeah.
Is that any better?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry. I don't know what happened there. Ashton was a young guy who came on our books at 15 years old. He was referred to us by a local response cop because he saw something in him, saw that he wasn't necessarily a bad guy, he was just getting caught up. His bread and butter was he was missing all the time. He was a missing person all the time. In a 6-month period before he joined the project, he was missing over 100 times. In the same 6-month period after joining the project, he was only missing twice. Now, to put that into kind of some context, an average cost of a missing person away for 8 hours deemed at medium risk is £4,000. So over that 6-month period, we effectively saved the force in resources £400,000, which I think is about €460,000. So it's not necessarily what money, like the money, it's the resource as well that can be saved. And literally, just to finish off, these are some of our partners that we work with, music studios. There's some quotes from young people and people who we have worked with in the project. Thank you very much. I appreciate that we're way over time, but I appreciate you listening to us.
Well, thank you very much. There's so much to tell, so thank you very much for that. Conscious of time, I propose to skip the Q&A session as indicated in the chat. If you do have any questions, please put these questions into the chat so we could ask them or answer them afterwards. For now, I would hand over to Patrick Padding first, and then to Felix Gambreau for a brief reflection and to see what we can learn from these projects. So please, Patrick.
Thank you, Marcel, and thank you for your time. I will keep it short. I know that you are conscious of the time in this way. Patrick Padding, I'm the project coordinator of the KOBAN project. I'm a sworn officer of the Netherlands Police, and my career is in investigations as well as leading teams for community policing. So some observations, some reflections. So when it comes to community policing on itself, it's between police, citizens and partners. And really clearly, we need to know what is the objective. So already addressed by Jill, and really nice to capture those weak signals, tested knowledge. That's what we would like to do in community policing. It's also quite a traditional hiccup that we will say community policing is prevention for crime. It will prevent crime for sure. It's an effect, it is an outcome. But on itself, it's a systematic approach that we need to have in place to be trustworthy to the citizens. So it's not always related to only prevention. So community policing is to ensure safety and security, and mostly it's done in those smaller geographical areas, which also means that if the area changes due to all kinds of circumstances, geopolitical, migration, poverty, you name it, we should have that forward-looking approach to learn how we can adapt our system, our policing, to make sure that we will be there. Technology is a dominant factor. Society became technology-driven. So we should also have a clear strategy how we can interact with citizens. So most often people will not download an application as it's from police. If it's from city council, shared by other communities and citizens, they might be able and willing to join that digital communication. If you look upon the bigger picture also, community policing is local, but if you look upon bigger forces such as the Dutch police force, 65,000 people, how can we ensure that community policing will take place in the smaller neighborhoods without, let's say, having that rigid structure, that's the big governance of that central agency in place? And furthermore, I wrote down some parts like trust. Yeah, okay, that's clear. Transferability. What we learned in KOBAN, for example, that we are having now something like an exchange program, sending out community police officers to either Sardinia, Valencia, Utrecht, or whatever. And that is really meaningful because that will inspire people also. Community policing should also be to the point, which means that we need to be on the right time, talk to the right people with the right, let's say, objective, to build that trust, but also to make sure that community policing is labor force intensive. You can't do community policing sitting in a police car. You need to get out. You need to be aligned with the needs of the citizens. And also really nice that I learned, I think it was from Saskia, to maintain the subjective sense of security. we should be there, we should be positioned within society, really closely connected with our stakeholders to learn and build on. In this way, the gap model is really important. It learns us to
leave it alone.
What needs to be achieved.
You're gonna make it
as well as looking in those technologies, as I already mentioned. I can rattle on for a long time, but also due conscious to the time. I think what's important is for all of us, if you look upon methodologies such as the capability model, it really directly relates to POVA, personnel, information, organization, finance, administrative, and housing of policing. So all the research that has been done could really be injected in police organizations to learn about, okay, if we are a police force and we would like to be future-proof, having the right capabilities in place, what should we do with our staffing? What should we do in the methodology we have? Should policing, community policing, be an add-on, or should we change our system? Also, this will affect the complete police system. So hopefully, the things that we learned today, which have been very, very interesting, is then also really relevant for policing. So research that can be done as a follow-up, in my personal opinion, is that looking at the projects we have, really relevant insights, how we can make that transfer to restructure, reorganize policing in that way that community policing will be guaranteed. In changing times, in geopolitical situations, in losing trust, having a lot of tensions in society, I think that is the most urgent call for policing to make sure that policing will be a well-respected, recognized methodology. So I would like to keep it with this, Marcel, conscious by time, and hand over back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Patrick, for your reflection. And I bear with you. Hopefully you can all stay a bit longer for the final reflections of Felix. Felix, please.
Thank you very much, Marcel. Thank you very much to all the speakers today. It was some very poignant testimonies as well, very interesting views from the projects. Maybe just to present myself, I'm Felix Combreau. It's a pleasure to be working with Nada on the FCT topic at DG Home here at the European Commission. Among some of the files that I follow, community policing is sort of one of those files that I think deserves some more attention at all levels of policymaking. And I think today's session sort of reflects that certainly there are challenges, but the progress that is being made through the project, but also at the local level through NGOs, are having a positive effect. And if we look at the varying topics that we saw today, from aporophobia, if I'm saying that word correctly, I read it and sort of had a heart attack a little bit. Aporophobia in coastal cities, to building rural trust in Scotland. The relationship between police and community is not a soft supplementary concern. It really is a core operational question. So we need to be sure that the questions that we ask ourselves, or the questions that we ask of police, such as who watches the street when the patrol car moves on, who reports suspicious behavior, who mediates neighborhood disputes, these are not really rhetorical questions. These are daily pressures on overstretched police services across Europe, and community cooperation is increasingly part of that answer. And I think we've lost something in reducing the number of effective personnel that I think had been contributing to a better relationship with communities in the past, which is sort of this notion of the local officer, right? Technology can support community building to a point, but it still needs to be a personal and communal relationship to the actual people that bring that security and that sense of security to communities. When a visible sort of trusted figure like that disappears, police forces also lose a critical interaction and trust with their communities. So what replaces that is often a transactional, incident-driven relationship that's going to miss certain contextual cues and hints for proper engagement with these local communities. And rebuilding that interface is going to be a big challenge. And I think that the project that we've seen today, as well as the NGOs, have very clearly stated the needs of rebuilding this in a very strong way. And that aligns quite closely with the way that the EU sees things. From a Commission perspective, it sort of falls perfectly within the scope of Protect EU, which is the new European internal security strategy. This was presented on the 1st of April 2025. Protect EU adopts a whole of society approach, which recognizes citizens, businesses, civil society, not just as beneficiaries of security, but as active contributors to it. So community policing is going to be one of the more concrete operational expressions of this principle. And I want to be precise about what we mean here. The model we are interested in is not simply about officers being present in communities. It's also about structuring a relationship of shared responsibility. This is one where communities are going to take a more meaningful role in the maintenance of local order, in early warning, in norm setting, and in low-level conflict resolution. It should serve as a genuine extension of the policing function in societal fabric, without transferring risk or abandoning accountability. This matters for Protect EU's core objectives of threat anticipation, because for us, the best early warning system in Europe is an engaged, informed, and cooperative local population. And that can't be built through technology alone. It builds through sustained, trusted relationships, which is exactly what the projects today have shown, what they're trying to design, what they're testing, and the way that they're scaling. So I touched upon this question of pressure on law enforcement. There's of course this resource argument that we shouldn't be shy about making. Police services in general under Europe are under strain. Demand is rising, complexity of crimes is increasing, and recruitment pipelines are under pressure in many member states. So from our perspective, community policing is not just a trust-building exercise, it really is a force multiplier. And it's also, as Saskia said, about restoring a genuine sense of security within neighborhoods. So CP will be reducing the volume of calls, hopefully that require officer response. It should resolve tensions that often require interventions, and will hopefully create a layer of social regulation that takes real, measurable pressure off of frontline services. This is where I mentioned this notion of communities and as an extension of local security, and it deserves serious policy attention. It means also investing in structures, training, governance frameworks, and the accountability mechanisms that make it work safely and legitimately. It would also mean recognizing neighborhood watch schemes, community wardens, local mediation services, not as nice to have, but as integral components for security architecture. Looking ahead, the Commission will continue to fund research into this space through Horizon Europe and the Internal Security Fund, but also the upcoming European Competitiveness Fund, which should start in 2027, if I'm not mistaken. But the task is, of course, broader than just the funding. We need the findings from all of these projects, from all of these speakers today, to inform the way that member states think about police resourcing, training standards, and the relationship between formal law enforcement and the wider community safety ecosystem. Community policing must therefore be legible within the architecture of strategies like Protect EU, and not treated really as a local curiosity, but recognized as a structural element of how Europe itself feels safe and keeps itself safe, of course. So it's good to see that the vision of the Commission matches the findings of the projects presenting today. So to conclude, I would encourage everyone here, researchers, practitioners, civil society, to continue making the case loudly and with evidence. And today has been very much along those lines. So thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully I haven't taken up too much of your time. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Felix, and also for this very strong plea for community policing, and to stress also in the upcoming framework program. This will remain a very important topic, especially given the Protect EU policy that you have. Well, I want to thank every one of you. First of all of the speakers for delivering very interesting presentations. Thank you very much for that. And also thank you to all of the participants. Thank you for your patience. It took a bit longer than expected, and we did not have an interactive part for the answers. Nevertheless, I hope that you found it very interesting, and looking forward to meet you again for further updates on the community policing projects or other CERIS events. Well, thank you all very much, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Well done.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.